Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Leena Peltoniemi.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for listening to Epic Voyages on Inception Radio. I know that a lot of you are tuning in to listen to John Anthony West, but unfortunately, he got washed out by the hurricane. No power. So we will get him back. Meanwhile, we have with us Michael Rambacher, who is the Director of Paranormal Studies for E.P.I.C, and he is the host of a very successful Inception Radio Network program, Project White Paper. Michael has investigated extraordinary phenomena since his own experiences of the third kind, while he was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1966. He is an ordained priest of the Melchizedek order, and he has participated in a very high-profile paranormal cases. In a very recently released book, Diaries of the Dark Side by Cassidy O'Connor, with foreword by Michael, describes one such incredible story, and hopefully we can get Michael to tell us about it. He has vast experience and knowledge and will be very invaluable to our growing ranks of paranormal researchers and investigators nationwide. You have to forgive me because I have that accident on the wrong syllable, being a foreigner, an alien and stuff. So there you go. I want to welcome Michael. Michael, you there? You got your ears on?
Got my ears on. You said you're an alien. What color are you?
I belong to the Project White Paper.
You mean we have to investigate that?
Yes.
I see. Okay. Oh, well, I'm glad to be here. And thank you so much for asking me to come on this evening. I know it was a little bit of a rush thing, but I do appreciate it, and it's a pleasure and my privilege to be on with you tonight.
I'm glad you're here. Otherwise, I would be very silent, sitting here talking to myself.
You have to have some great experiences you could talk about.
I know, but in foreign languages and all.
Oh, I see.
Hey, Michael, would you mind if we talk a little bit about your experiences at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base?
Oh, good old Wright-Pat. It seems
yes.
It seems to creep in a lot. You know what I'm going to do tonight, because since I'm on the other end of this, I'll take probably about 10, 12 minutes, and I'll go through the sequential way that this whole thing came down. There's a lot of people out there in chat and anybody else that's heard parts of this story, but I'll try to fill in all the blanks that we left out because of lack of time and everything else. So it was great that you brought this up at the beginning so we can get into it, but I guess we just might as well start at the beginning. I went in the Air Force in 1966. I was from Akron, Ohio. And ironic enough, there had to have been, I would say, just in my basic training group, there was about 65, and the whole graduating class was about 4,000. And it was amazing. I was the only one to be sent back to my home state after basic training. Figure that out. And then I get where? Wright-Patterson. Well, back then I was just a kid out of high school, and I didn't know anything about Wright-Patterson or its history or anything else. So it was sort of amazing. And but I went in '66. And the scenario happened. I was in security at Air Force Logistics Command, which is what Wright-Patterson was at that time. We had a tenant organization there from SAC, and it was a division of the 509th. It wasn't the 509th, but it was a branch of the 509th. Now, to set the stage for all of this and how this whole story plays out throughout my whole life, the 509th, for all of you history people, was the group of the Enola Gay that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima.
Right.
Yeah, they're the boys that did that. The fuselage of the Enola Gay, matter of fact, sits at Wright-Pat at the museum. Anybody gets around to seeing it, it's quite a walkthrough if you get to do that. Plus the original plane that dropped the next bomb on Nagasaki, the whole plane and a copy of the bomb, and the whole thing is there. So it's really an interesting thing if you're dealing with history. But the 509th was that bomb group that dropped that bomb. They were then stationed after the war at, here we go, Roswell Air Station in Roswell, New Mexico.
Coincidence?
Coincidence or not. After that scenario went on, obviously they were the ones that cleaned up the supposed Roswell crash. They were the ones that transported the material, and I'm using that word very lightly, the material to Fort Worth in Texas first, and then from Fort Worth it went on to Wright-Pat. And this took place in 1947. Happened to be the year of my birth. Another one of those just little puzzle pieces that throw in once in a while. At that point, the 509th doesn't really do anything that would create anything that would cause anybody to look at it. But here we get to 1967. I'm a security guy on the gate at Gate 26. Gate 26 at Wright-Patterson is at the very end of the main runway. And you can see all the incoming aircraft coming in because it's got to fly right over top of you because it's got to land right behind you. So anything that came in or out, I was aware of. This took place on July 3rd of 1967 at about 2 in the morning. I happened to have been talking with another guy at another gate 4 miles away, and I saw this B-52 coming in. And that's what the SAC organization, that's what the 509th Division had, 52s, 135s, and some F-4 fighters. They had a couple of the old B-20s, or B-57s. They were being phased out, but they did have some in the early ongoing of that whole operation, but they were eliminated before I left there even. Anyway, so I saw this plane coming in, and we just kept talking, but I noticed on the final approach that its outboard engine appeared to be on fire. So at that point, I said, can you take a look? Because the guy was a little bit elevated, even though he was 4 miles away. I said, I got a plane coming in. Do you see anything strange about it? So he got his binoculars out. He says, yeah, the end of the wing is on fire. I said, okay, fine. So hang up. So the plane comes in, goes right over top, and yes, the outside portion of the wing was on fire. No sooner did that plane land behind me, and I heard the crash units with their sirens, and they went racing down the runway. Now, at this point, I'm inside the facility that we have there at the end of the runway. And I'm looking on the approach side, so the runway's behind me. We had a bank of trees that was probably about 150 to 200 yards away on the other side of the road that ran down through there. About 30 seconds after I heard the crash units, that whole tree line lit up orange. And I'm going, oh my God. The tree line lit up orange. The crash unit was coming down. The wingtip was on fire. So what I assumed was I was seeing the glare from the plane that just blew up behind me. This next part is missing time. At least 15, 20, 25 seconds of total missing time. I have never been able to recall leaving the inside of that structure. The next thing I remember is being outside the building and looking down the runway. And what I saw, the runway was 150 feet wide, was a glowing orange ball about 50 feet above the ground moving directly down the center line of the runway. Nothing you could make out about it. A little bit of what I would call a sparkler noise, like if you had sparklers the 4th of July, a little bit of that hissing, spitting sound or whatever. That was all that you could make out of that, and you couldn't make out anything, any form of it other than it being a glowing ball. I flew back inside, called a guy that I was talking to earlier. I said, look towards Patterson and tell me what the heck you see. He said, there's buildings blocking, but he says, I see an orange glow that seems to be moving slowly. And he said, okay, hang up, because this thing's headed towards right field. Called the guard up at right field, and I said, hey, take a look towards Patterson and tell me what the heck you see. And he says, hey, it's 2 in the morning, right field? You got to be kidding me. Nothing ever goes on up here, particularly at 2 in the morning. It's dark, there's no lights, and about that time, I could even hear that sparkler sound on his telephone receiver. And it went totally dead. And I said, okay, John, what's going on? And about that time, 2 F-4s were pulled out, F-4 fighters, and they were scrambled behind me. They kicked their afterburners, and they were heading. They were going after it. And I said, John, what the heck is that thing doing? He says, it's sitting down over the old test runway that they had, the original runway at right field, going back to the 20s. He says it's just hovering over that area down there. And I said, okay, you got 2 F-4s coming. They're going to be there in 10 seconds. They're hauling tail, so be ready. No sooner did I get it out of my mouth than I could hear the vibration over the telephone receiver, and the guy started yelling. He goes, I'm going, what the heck is going on? He said, this thing just shot straight up into the air. It's cut over to the right. The jets peeled off to the right. They're chasing off after it. And he says, I've lost all 3 of them beyond the woods. I told that story for people that were interested for about 40 years. Somewhere in that neighborhood. For most of them, that's where the story ended. I mean, it had no ending. For those that I felt should know, I went a little further on what happened when I got off duty. I happened to work at an airport for my career near Jamestown, New York, and I had a good hour drive, and sometimes at 3 in the morning through the wood area, it was pretty quiet, and it just creeped upon me. I don't know, it might have been 94. It hit me on one of those drives in, out of the clear blue. The friggin' F-4s never came back. Those 2 fighters that were scrambled after this thing, that peeled off after it, where the guy lost total sight of all of it. Those planes, I was there 5 hours more, and those F-4s never showed up. They were gone. Incredible. They never came back. So, with more stuff that came to be revealed, when I got off duty at 7 in the morning, I got back to the air police barracks, turned in everything, and I asked one of the sergeants, I said, Sarge, I said, do you know anybody at the FTD building? And he goes, there aren't too many military there. There's a lot of civilians working there. And I said, well, he says, this is about what went on last night? I said, yeah. I said, I think I need to talk to somebody. So he says, he gave me this guy's name. And so when I got back to my barracks, I called and got a hold of him. And I said, you were referred to me, and I probably need to talk to you or somebody. He said, is this about what happened last night? I said, I was on gate 26. He says, holy cow. He says, has anybody called you or talked to you yet? I said, no. He said, okay. First of all, he said, for the rest of the day, don't say another word about it. Don't say anything. Nothing. And he says, meet me in my room at the dorm after chow tonight. And I said, okay, fine. So I show up and come in. We both had top secret security clearances. But, there's always the right to know. And that's what that comes into. And I didn't know a lot about, all of this stuff, the UFO stuff. It was back in the 60s. Nobody talked about it, and there wasn't a lot about it. Even though I was from northeastern Ohio, and we went through about a year and a half of nothing but flying saucers everywhere. It just was something that wasn't yet discussed in the public. So I started yapping at him. He says, what can I do for you? I said, first of all, just some answers to questions. And he says, you know where we're at. And I said, I understand. And so I started talking about, I said, what about this Roswell thing in New Mexico back in 47? And, that should have tipped me off to the date, but it didn't. It went right over top of my head. Of course, I was only 20 years old, so it went over the top. And I said, supposedly the Army, drove this flatbed out into the desert, and the guys picked up all this stuff in pieces and parts, and even 3 little guys, and the skin was described as peach fuzz, and threw them on, and everything came here to Right Pat. He says, Mike, he says, there are things we just can't talk about. And I said, I understand. So then I went on, I said, what about 52 and the Washington, D.C. lights? I said, that was really amazing because that showed up on all the radar screens of all the airports around D.C. The lights were there for like 3 days over the White House, the Capitol building. They sent up fighter jets after those guys. Supposedly, one was shot down into the Potomac River, and pieces are here at Right Pat in your building, at the FTD building. And FTD is Foreign Technology Division. You think they hid Blue Book? I don't think they hid it very well. Foreign technology? Yeah, it's foreign technology, all right. So he says, Mike, there's stuff I just can't talk about. And I said, okay, all right, I understand. And so he says, but I will tell you this. He said, we have a piece of amazing stuff. He says, it looks like aluminum foil. You put it in your hand, and you can't even feel that you got it in your hand. You crumple it up in a ball and throw it down, and before it hits the ground or wherever you're throwing it, it flattens right back out into its original shape. I said, you're kidding. He says, you wanted an answer. And I said, okay. He says, we've tried drills, we've tried saws, we've tried everything to get through this. It's so thin you can't even measure how thin it is. And we can't penetrate it. We cannot get through it. We've even tried laser beams, and that back then lasers were in its infancy, but he said that's what they tried. So he said, we have no idea what it is. And I go, okay, fine. You have to remember, this is 1967, and this story comes out. So I was ready to leave, and I opened the door, and I says, well, thank you very much. I told you my story. He said, I advise you just to keep quiet, and maybe nobody will bother you. I said, all right. So I opened the door and went to leave, and he goes, Mike, by the way, those little guys, it wasn't peach fuzz skin. Mm-hmm. So without telling me they had them, he told me they had them. By saying that statement, they told me that he had them.
He confirmed it. Yes.
Oh, yeah, he confirmed it. He confirmed it without confirming it. So that was the way that went. So for the next 2-3 days, pretty quiet. On the 4th day, I was at another gate during the day, and the lieutenant showed up in a car. And the car came through the gate and parked behind the building I was in. And the lieutenant came out and said, I'm going to watch your post here, Mike, for a while. There's two gentlemen in the car. Get in the back seat and remember who you are. And I said, okay. I wondered what this was all about. Well, I got in the car, and these were not what I would consider now the boys in black, but back in '67, they may have been the boys in black. They did what the boys in black do, and it was an interrogation. And the only person that was talking was the guy in the passenger seat, and he was always looking straight forward. The driver always looked forward and never said a single word during the whole thing. So he asked me to go through what I experienced on that date. And I went through everything that I have just told all of you. And we got to the end of that whole discussion, and he says, are you sure that's exactly what you saw and what you experienced? I said, yes, sir, that's what I saw. And I stood there watching it. And I saw that plane come in with that wing on fire. He says, by the way, he said, that plane that came in had a collision with the plane out near Springfield, Ohio. It took the outer engine right off the plane. So there was a collision between that orange ball and that B-52 that was inbound. In the fall, just to add to this, in the fall when the farmers were digging up their corn crops, they found the engine. There was a big picture of the farmer and the jet engine in the field in the Dayton paper. It was quite an interesting piece. The other interesting thing, the next day, or it might have been 2 days later, the Dayton paper on some obscure page back in the 40s somewhere, page 42 or something. I used to always say 42, but I can't remember exactly what it was. But there was a paragraph at the bottom of a page that said, 2 F-4s were scrambled last night from Wright-Patterson and chased an unidentified flying object and lost it at a high altitude. That was it, buried on page 42, and who leaked that information to the newspaper? I would love to know who leaked that one and how they had to sit in the back of a car answering all these questions. But anyway, so that conversation went on like that, and he said, you know, you've got a lot of time left in the Air Force. And he said, do you know who you work for? I said, yes, sir, I work for the government. You know, GI. And I go, yep, I know what that means. And it's government issue, and that's what they want you to do. And he says, well, the government doesn't want you really to talk about this. And he said, things could get, you know, a little bit difficult for the rest of your career if you decide to start talking to people about this whole situation. And he says, do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? I said, yeah, you're telling me that this thing never happened. He said, that's a good description. As far as we're concerned and as far as you're concerned, this incident never happened. And I said, I see where you're coming from. Okay, fine. So that lasted about 25 minutes. And I got out, went back in the shack, and that was it. They were gone. What happened next, I feel, is I don't know if it's purposefully done or not, but a week after that incident, I was back on nights again, and the lieutenant came to me and said, go over to the cage over there and check out a carbine, a rifle. I said, sir, I mean, I've got my sidearm. He says, I know you do, but you need a rifle. And check out some ammo with it. I said, okay. He says, I've got a special place for you tonight. And I'm going, all right. So I hopped in his car, took me down to the flight line at Patterson Field. And we started out down a taxiway that was all dark, and we got to the end, and the tree line popped up, but what loomed out of the tree line was where I was going to be sitting all night or walking around. Here were 2 C-119s. Those are cargo planes. And the lieutenant said, Michael, it's 2.5 miles back to that main hangar. You can see everybody coming. He said, in no uncertain terms, I don't care if a 4-star general shows up here tonight. Nobody gets by you to these planes. Nobody. He said, if you start seeing lights coming up that same taxiway that we came, here's a portable radio, and you call me immediately. And nobody gets by you to these planes tonight. I go, okay. So that's where I spent all night, was under and around these two C-119s. Being there for about 6 or 7 hours, you start really thinking about everything that's gone on. Now I'm at the opposite end of the runway that I was at a week ago, earlier, and I started looking at the planes. Do you know there was not a single number, letter, insignia, nothing on either of the two planes? Nothing. Not even entrance hatch right here. There was nothing. It was totally blank. It did not even have an aircraft number, which is unheard of. No numbers, no writing, no insignia, no U.S. Air Force, no.
Talk about black
Absolutely.
ops.
Yeah, you want to talk about black ops? I got relieved by the lieutenant at about 10 minutes to 7 in the morning. I got back to the barracks where I turned in the rifle, and I started back because I had to go by relatively close. I could see it half a mile away from where I was. One part was clear of vegetation, so you could actually see where I was at. Within 15 minutes of me leaving, those planes were gone. They were not there. They were gone. I was totally astounded. How could the crew even get out there, get everything cranked, and get the planes out of there in 15 minutes? I'm still to this day, but they were gone. I did walk around them, and at a couple of points, I stuck my ear up to them, and I actually knocked on the sides. But I have to say I never heard anything and got no response back. But I do believe that whatever was in those planes, the reason the planes were there was because of what happened a week earlier. I think they were moving material around. And I think the material from Roswell, some of it was on those planes. Just because of what happened. And why was I the one that got that special assignment? Because essentially, I was the only one, other than the guy that was up at right field, was the only ones with AFLC that actually saw the objects. Now, the SAC personnel saw the object. They had to. The people in the tower had to see the object because they were standing there watching the thing. I would venture that in the neighborhood of a good 150 to 200 people had to see that whole incident transpire. They didn't see what happened at the end of it at right field because right field was empty. So the guy on the gate at right field was the only guy probably that saw that, because right field was the R&D of the Air Force. I don't believe there was anybody really working up there at night. There never was. It was amazing. So as that all turns out, I transferred out of Air Police. I got a purchasing job there at Wright Pat. I transferred out. A freeze went in. Nobody in Air Police could get out. So I got out right at the very end of when I could get out. So I got out and got into purchasing. So I was there another year and a half at Wright Pat, and all of a sudden I got orders to go to Tainan, Taiwan. Now this has got to be the armpit assignment of the world. Taipei would have been great. It was the capital city.